Welcome back to another Diablo 4 video. Today we're going to be talking about 8 different potential starter builds for the launch of the game. So I decided to do it this way opposed to just releasing a bunch of videos. So I've put everything into a spreadsheet, 8 different potential builds using any of the core skills. So hopefully there's something here for the playstyle that you want to run to hopefully give you an efficient way to level up. So just quickly, we've got Landslide here, Landslide Companions, Pulverize, Pulverize Companions, Lightning Storm Companions, Poison Shred, and Tornado. There's also a link to the D4 Builds build planner for each build in the top left of each page of the document. And this document will be linked in the description of this video, so if that's all you're here for, that's where you can find it. So we've got the order to take skill points in here, along with some notes here and there, and I may iterate on this a little bit in the coming days, so you may see some changes within the spreadsheet, and we also need to see what the launch patch is going to look like. There may be some changes to things that we need to go back in and potentially edit. So we're not going to do a super deep dive on all the builds because this video would be like an hour long, but we'll quickly go over all of them. But before we do that, I just want to talk about a few kind of leveling principles here. So first off, leveling is a fluid process. So that means that just because I've put on paper here that you should take skill points in this order does not necessarily mean that's the proper way to go about it when you're actually in the game. Depending on what your gear looks like, depending on what legendaries you've dropped, you can absolutely change things. There may be a point where I say, hey, take a damage node here, but maybe your damage already feels really good, but you're dying because you haven't invested enough in defense or damage reduction or even healing. I might say, hey, take these 3 defensive points, but you've been face tanking everything in the game up to that point. This is more of just a guideline that you can follow exactly, or you can modify yourself. So every core ability in the game for Druid has a signature legendary that goes along with it. None of those are from completing dungeons. Those are going to be random drops. But for the most part, if you drop one of those, you're probably going to be thinking about switching your leveling build to one of those builds. Or if maybe you'll get lucky enough and drop the one specifically for the build you're already playing. You don't have to change your build, but you may want to. So let's talk about each one of those real quick. First up, we have Landslide with Aspect of the Aftershock. Landslide is going to be one of the most popular leveling builds in general, mainly because of the modifier where we're able to guarantee a crit with increased critical strike damage. It's going to be very strong. But it gets even stronger when you apply Aspect of the Aftershock to your build. Landslide's Earth Pillars each strike a second time and deal additional damage. Then you can also potentially get the Trample Landslide legendary, where Trample actually casts landslides behind you as you trample. Next up, we have Tornado with Storm Chaser's Aspect. So Tornado is my favorite core skill, really probably my favorite Druid skill in the game, but the pathing of Tornado and how it functions is just pretty clunky and doesn't feel great until you get Storm Chaser's Aspect. This allows the Tornado to seek enemies out. I wouldn't recommend running Tornado as a starter unless you find this legendary. And honestly, if I were to find that legendary, I would probably switch to Tornado and never look back. Then we've got Pulverize with the Shockwave Aspect. So this reads, Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing a percentage of its damage to targets in the path. So this basically just turns Pulverize into a massive AoE in front of your character. And you could imprint this on your amulet to get even more damage. If you drop this thing, Pulverize is probably going to be one of the best feeling leveling builds just because of the massive area of effect. Then we have Shred with Aspect of the Blurred Beast. This reads, while dashing, Shred seeks out nearby poisoned enemies, instantly dealing a percentage of the poisoning damage to them. So you just throw a bunch of poisons on the enemies, you start shredding around. Shred is potentially going to also be applying poisons. The poison crit leveling Shred build is kind of growing on me in general. So yeah, if you drop this thing, throw that in there, and I think you'd be cruising. And then finally, we have Lightning Storm with Lightning Dancer's Aspect. Lightning Storm critical strikes spawn 3 dancing bolts that seek enemies in the area, dealing lightning damage. I would say this is probably the weakest of all of them, mainly because it's tied behind critical strikes, and early on, if you were to drop this, you're not going to have a really high critical strike chance. So if it was me personally, if I was playing a different build to start and this dropped, I don't think I would switch to Lightning Storm, but that's up to you. Alright, before we talk about the builds themselves, one last thing that I want to discuss is aspect of the Umbral. I think this has the potential to be the best legendary aspect for leveling that you can get. It comes from dry steps, so if you imprint it from your codex, it's going to restore one of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. And really, for Druid, one of the things that felt really bad in the betas was resource generation. That's a lot of the complaints was just that you had to generate resources so much to actually deal any damage. This thing in most of these builds that I'm going to show you should be generating tons of resource. Now, obviously against a boss, it's not going to be that great, but your general leveling, this thing's going to feel really good. The majority of builds, you've got, 4 or 5 different ways to crowd control. For instance, in this build, aspect of quicksand makes your earth skills slow, massive AoE crowd control with the poison creeper, storm strike immobilizes, trample knocks back. Like, there is just tons of ways in every build to get aspect of the Umbral online. All right, let's talk about the builds. So first up, we have the 2 Landslide builds. Now, all of these builds are going to have a pretty similar concept. So you've got the Landslide regular build and the Landslide companion build. So the normal builds you're going to see, on all of them, I'm running Storm Strike as a generator, your core skill, Poison Creeper, Trample, Blood Howl, Earthen Bulwark. Then in the companion versions, a generator, your core skill, the 3 companions, and Earthen Bulwark. Alternatively, you can run Blood Howl instead of Ravens with the Night Howler's aspect, that when you Blood Howl, it'll actually affect your other companions. So you just run 2 companions in that with Blood Howl. All legendaries in these builds are ones that you can unlock from dungeons to your codex that you can then apply to rares. Alright, so let's talk about the skill choices. So we have Storm Strike. Storm Strike is your best basic skill because it has built-in 25% damage reduction. It also has a chance to immobilize, and has a very high chance to apply vulnerable from the modifiers on the tree. Now, in some of these builds, if you want to run more of a ranged version, you could switch this out for something else, but pretty much every one of these is going to be more melee-oriented, even if your core skill is a ranged skill. Landslide, the most powerful of the core skills without legendaries, mainly because of the second modifier there. Whenever you immobilize or stun an enemy, you gain a Terramote stack. Then when you hit with Landslide, it consumes a Terramote stack, causing a guaranteed crit with 40% critical strike damage. Poison Creeper in general is just a really strong AoE damage dealer on a 20-second cooldown. It also enables poison for various things. And then also, it's an AoE immobilize, so it helps you get those Terramote stacks. Trample is your movement ability, but it also deals considerable damage on a 14-second cooldown, and then will grant you 20 spirit on use from that second modifier. And if you trample into an enemy, it's going to knock them back. If you knock an enemy into terrain, it'll stun them, also generating Terramotes. It also makes you unstoppable, which makes you immune from crowd control. So, Blood Howl, it's a 20% of your maximum life heal, which is nice, but the reason I like Blood Howl so much is kills reduce the cooldown of Blood Howl by 1 second, which means you can use it very consistently if you're killing quickly. And then you can either get 20 spirit every time you use it, or attack speed every time you use it. It also has very good synergy with a couple other things that you can do, one of them being Bolster. Fortify for 10% of your maximum life when you use a defensive skill. Early on, this is the one defensive skill you can use very consistently. The other thing that it's really good with is Vigilance. You gain 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. So then we have Earthen Bulwark. It's going to give you a barrier that absorbs a percentage of your base life and damage. Then it also makes you unstoppable while it's active. And again, unstoppable is going to... You basically cannot get crowd controlled, and if you do get crowd controlled, you can pop Earthen Bulwark, or Trample for that matter, and break yourself out of it. It gets much better when you get Aspect of Mending Stone in Dry Steps. This is going to increase the duration of Earthen Bulwark by 6 seconds, and then killing an enemy with Earth skills replenishes some of the active Earthen Bulwark's barrier. On top of that, you can get Ghostwalker's Aspect from Skazglen. While you're unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, you gain 10% increased movement speed and can move freely through enemies. The rest of the aspects, Aspect of Quicksand, makes your earth skills slow, Ballistic aspect, while you have Fortify, your Earth skills gain +2 ranks. Aspect of the Expectant gives you some more damage after attacking with a basic skill. Aspect of Retaliation, your core skills deal increased damage based on your amount of Fortify. Crashstone aspect, Earth skills deal more critical strike damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and again, we are guaranteeing crits. And then, of course, the aspect of the Umbral that we already discussed. For Spirit Boons, you definitely want the 30% critical strike damage, again, guaranteeing crits. I've got 10% reduced damage from elites. Bolster, Fortify for 10% of your maximum life when you use a defensive skill. This may not even be necessary. We have other ways to get Fortify. Energize, on lucky hit, you have a chance to restore Spirit. And then every 10th kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. Now, if you don't feel like you need Bolster, you could run Swooping Attacks for attack speed, Iron Feather for maximum life. You could even run Pack Leader. Resetting the cooldown of Vine Creeper is not the worst idea, and you are guaranteeing crits, so you only have 2 layers of RNG involved here. You just have to get a lucky hit, and then a percentage chance after that. Alright, so then the Landslide starter with companions. We are also running Wolves and Ravens. Then, of course, in this version, you definitely want to run Pack Leader. And I will have all the boons in the spreadsheet as well for all of the builds. So like I said, you have the 2 options of either running Bloodhowl over Ravens or to run Ravens. My recommendation in the leveling guides is to start with Bloodhowl, and then when you get Shepherd's Aspect from Dry Steppes, switch to Ravens. Alright, so then we have the Pulverize starter. So the big thing here that you got to look out for is Aspect of the Ursine Horror. So this turns Pulverize into an Earth skill. Now in the betas, even though it doesn't say it on the tooltip, this was also giving Pulverize the Nature Magic tag. So you're going to see some passives taken that reference Nature Magic. Just know that at least in the beta, it was getting that tag. We'll have to see how that looks at launch. But, you know, obviously, don't take any passives that reference Earth or Nature Magic until you get this Codex power. Then for the Spirit Boons, we're taking Critical Strike chance over the Critical Strike damage. We do have Bolster in here, but there's a pretty good chance that you've got enough Fortify generation, so you could just drop that and go with both the crit chance and crit damage. You could easily also go for Maximum Life or Masochistic down here for some more healing. So then we have the Pulverized Companion starter. Not really much more to talk about there, very similar to the Landslide starter. Skill tree is going to be different, but same setup, just Pulverize instead of Landslide. Of course, we're running Pack Leader to reset the cooldown of your companions. And you've got these 2 legendary powers that both reference Earth skills. So again, until you get this aspect, these aren't going to be online for you. Alright, so next up we have Lightning Storm. Basically, it's a channeled skill that, as you channel it, it builds up extra lightning strikes. And then, with a modifier, the size of your lightning storm is preserved for 4 seconds after channeling. So you can build it up to the maximum amount of lightning strikes, and then you're able to move around as long as you just make sure you're casting lightning strike again before that 4 seconds is up. Now, the one good thing about Lightning Storm is I feel like this build is going to have a ton of crowd control. You're going to be immobilizing all over the place. I wouldn't personally recommend Lightning Storm for leveling, but I know there's a lot of people that like the skill and want to try to use it. I would run Landslide, Pulverize, and Shred over Lightning Storm. But with that said, we have a few different legendary aspects here, so I put Aspect of Disobedience in here. This gives you armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, and can stack up to 25%. And I would think in a Lightning Storm build, you're going to be doing a bunch of hits, so I think you can get a pretty decent amount of armor out of this. It's also running Aspect of Might for a 20% damage reduction after you use a basic skill. And then the big one that I'm not entirely sure how good this is going to be, but I feel like it could be pretty solid, is Overcharged Aspect. On lucky hit, up to a 10% chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target for 3 seconds, causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse damage to surrounding enemies. I'll have to see how this is in practice, but I think it could be pretty good. But if it isn't good enough, you could put one of the other offensive legendary aspects on your amulet to get that 50% bonus. Then for boons, you definitely want to run Bolster in this one. You don't have a lot of ways to gain Fortify. So this is going to be one of your main ways to do that. And then we're also running Overload. On lucky hit, dealing lightning damage has up to a 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing 20% lightning damage to surrounding enemies. And then again, we have the companion set up for Lightning Storm if you want to run that. Same principles apply as we've already discussed with the other companion builds. So then we have the Poison Crit Werewolf starter build. Now this one veers off a little bit from the other kind of setups that we've been running in these builds. We're still running Storm Strike. Shred is going to be our main core damage dealer. Poison Creeper. We're running Rabies to apply more AoE poisons. And then this build we're actually able to get some werewolf aspects from Act 1. So we've got the Night Howlers aspect, which is going to give yourself and companions and players nearby crit chance. Now this build is poison, but it definitely wants to crit. Our Keystone is going to give us a guaranteed crit every so often, but then also with Toxic Claws passive, you are able to apply poisons whenever you crit with werewolf skills. So you also have Aspect of the Unsatiated you can get in Act 1, which we aren't running a werewolf generator here for the spirit part, but after you kill an enemy with Shred, your next werewolf skill will deal 20% increased damage. And then also Stormclaw's aspect. Critical strikes with Shred deal 20% of the damage dealt as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. Now it may make sense to still run Aspect of Retaliation in this build, which is your core skills deal increased damage based on your amount of Fortify. And I think we'll have enough Fortify even in this build. We're getting Fortify from Earthen Bulwark. We're getting it from our boon. And then we're also getting Fortify whenever we shapeshift into a werewolf. Which that brings us over to Skinwalker's aspect. So this reads, when you use a shapeshifting skill that changes your form, gain X life. If you are at full life, gain the same amount as Fortify. This thing I feel like is going to be extremely powerful, and you could potentially even put this on your amulet to get more life and more Fortify out of it. So then as far as spirit boons go, we're going with crit and critical strike damage. And then down here, bolster, and then also masochistic. Critical strikes with shapeshifting skills heal you for 3% maximum life. And then shred itself is going to also heal you for 1% of maximum life when you hit an enemy. So I would start with the modifier that allows Shred's third attack to apply poison, but eventually you may want to switch to the other one that allows Shred, every one of Shred's attacks to dash, and you get extra critical strike damage, especially if you get that aspect of the Blurred Beast. And then finally we have the Tornado starter. Now, this is a pretty similar setup, you know, we've got our Storm Strike, Core Skill, 2 defensives, Poison Creeper, Trample. Nothing too crazy there. Again, I would only run this if you drop the Storm Chaser's aspect. Now you can put it on the amulet to get it to seek more targets. Maybe it's good enough to just put on gloves or a ring, and you can put something else here for a bigger damage increase. But yeah, unless you really have your heart set on playing Tornado from the very beginning, I would just wait until you drop this. Alright, so that's going to about wrap it up, guys. Again, I will have the document in the description, so you can go to that and see the order of skill points, all that good stuff. I'll have the spirit boons in there for each build. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.